live from his home studio. Please welcome the host of The Core, Jason Rahm.
Well, hello there, everyone out there in the internet land. Welcome to the third episode of The Core. I think this is episode 3. You would think with only 3, I would know what episode it is. But hey, I've got that post-holiday haze, I guess. Actually, we're kind of in the middle of holidays because we've had Thanksgiving. Now we've had Christmas here in the United States. And then, come this weekend, we have New Year's. And so we'll kick off a new year, which is crazy. They seem to be going faster and faster every year, accelerating, and I'm going to blink and I'm going to be 70, and who knows what streaming will look like, or whether we'll even be streaming. Maybe we'll all be in Ready Player One land by then, who knows. But thank you for joining me today. We're going to talk about iRules today, and we had an iRules show with Boo and I a while back, and there were some asks to talk about troubleshooting techniques, and so we're going to talk about that today. Before we do that, though, we're coming out of Christmas a weekend, and I got a lot of things from a lot of people, and it was nice. Probably my 2 favorites. I have a 3D printer. It's the Ender Pro V2 or Ender 3. No, Ender 3 V2, and from Creality, and Boo and I were talking about that before the show here. He got a 3D printer recently, and we're talking about modifications and all that. And anyway, leveling the bed on my 3D printer has been problematic for me, and so I got from my in-laws a auto bed leveler. And so that's going to be extremely helpful for me not to have to pull my hair out after, the first 30 seconds of a print going very poorly. And so that's one of them. And the other one is, let me get the title exactly because I don't have the book right in front of me. But it is, the other book I got is 97 Things Every Information Security Professional Should Know. And so looking forward to reading into that. And if anybody's read that book, or if you have something that you think every security professional should know, drop that in the comments. I'd love to hear about it. And so let's get on to iRules troubleshooting. And the very first thing and I reached out to a bunch of people internally, former F5ers, MVPs, and all that. And by and large, the number one thing that they talked about is actually going to be number 2 on my list, because I'm going to set the stage here. So my number 1, not to bury the lead here, is use the iRules and F5 extensions with Visual Studio Code. So if you have not installed that, you should. And I'll come back to VS Code, and I'll just share it real quick. We'll play with it here in a little bit. And by the way, if you want to jump in on my live share here, I think I've got it set up. Let me see if I still have it in my, yep, there it is. Yeah, if you want to jump in on that, you can join me in the project I'm going to be working on, and share your tips, either in comments or just open a file and do that. Totally fine. And so using the iRules and F5 extensions with Visual Studio Code. And some people have expressed some concerns with how those things work together. The good news is the developers of both are working on merging those into a single project. So the way they work together will be better, but it's not terrible now. And so if you, create a new file and Command K, M, and then select iRule, then you can just start typing, and you're going to have all of the things in that old Windows version of the iRule editor that Joe Pruitt created. You'll have all of those helpful tips, command completion. You even get like little warning messages here that says, "Hey, you haven't explicitly set a priority. Why don't you go ahead and do that?" And that's one of the things when you're learning iRules that might be a little lacking understanding, in that everything is a priority 500 when you add it in the GUI. And so if everything is 500, then the order that you place it in the GUI dictates the priority. And so if you have 5 iRules, the first one will have a higher priority than the second, then the third, but it's not really explicitly laid out that way. And so choosing a number is the way to go there. So you can set that priority here, or you say, hey, I want this one to run first, or whatever. So everything 1 to I think 999 might be the highest. If anybody knows that, drop in the comments. I actually don't know what the top is. I think it's 999, but 1 to something, 500 being kind of the middle. So I assume it's 999, but we'll see. And so that's where you can set your priority. But anyway, the iRule editor here is super helpful for command completion. And this is a log statement that is not helpful at all, is it? But that is anyway. And so where this comes into play with integrating with the F5 extension is, I can go ahead and connect to my big IP, and you can see down here I've got my iRules, all the iRules on there. Now what I didn't do here, you're normally writing an iRule, is I didn't actually say that this is an LTM rule, my new rule. Let me escape that. And because these are treated as objects in the extension that you're going to merge, because you're treating these as objects you're going to merge, you actually have to put the LTM object declaration there. And so then if you want to save this to the big IP, you can just right click, merge, and then that was a successful merge. So now I should have in this list, if I refresh it, my new iRule, which I do. And one of the things that they're going to try and make better here is when you open this from this list, there's not a temporary file system. So all these are created as untitled's in VS Code. So if you click X out of here, it's saying, whoa, do you want to save this? Because it's not going to be saved. This is just relative to Visual Studio Code. It's not relative to Big IP. So I can cancel out of that and click Don't Save. But that is still going to be here. So I think that's one of the things that is going to be an improvement coming in VS Code. But that said, use Visual Studio Code, use the iRule editor, use all the other benefits that you get for using the F5 extension. When you use them together, you get a lot of benefit in doing so. All right. So now the number 2, which is really everybody else's number 1, is log everything. And when I say log everything, I mean everything. When you're trying to figure out what's going on, it's helpful to log it all. And that could be problematic if you're trying to do it in production. So don't do that. Don't log everything in production, because that can be hard on your local system if you're logging it to disk. So when I'm going to go through the list of things to log, and then I'm going to start adding clarifications. So we're going to kick it off with a video that was submitted by former F5er Patrick Chang. And when he gets done, I'll go through a list of stuff.
Troubleshooting Eyerolls, huh? Well, I would start with log everything. And but put it inside an if statement so that you can control when you output the logging, and then have it all controlled by a single variable which you can set at the top of the iRule. That way you can turn it on and off. If you get fancy, you can split it up into different sections, or maybe even have different depth levels of logging. The other thing that I would recommend is use the try-catch structure as much as possible. This will save you a lot of headaches when things go wrong, and it gives you opportunity to try to figure out what's happening. And really, one of the first things that you should log is what request did you receive, because the most common problems come when you end up getting requests that you didn't anticipate.
Okay. So yeah, back to what he was saying is log everything. The try catch release, we'll talk about that. here in a second. But what Patrick is talking about here is using this nomenclature of setting a static variable debug. You got to be careful with static namespaces if you're using that on multiple different iRules and you intend for it to be used differently. Then turning it on in one might start logging something else, and so maybe make that a little bit more descriptive. But while he was talking there, I was adding his recommendation there is to use static debug variable to be able to turn logging on and off. That way you don't have to comment stuff on and off as you're troubleshooting. One of the other logging recommendations was to use a string that you can pull out. And if you're going to do even something else rather than just on and off, because you might think just 0 and 1 here, turn the log statement on and off. But what if you have different levels? And so you could have in HTTP disabled, you have your static debug, if it exists at all, log it. But maybe you want to change that to if the static debug equals 5, then go ahead and do something important there. And that way you can set various levels of logging to where you can get more and more logging or less and less logging, depending on what your purposes are for that depth of troubleshooting. But being able to turn everything on and off is a great way to leave logging in your iRules. One of the things that it doesn't do by turning it off is all these statements are still evaluated. So if you have 400 statements that are going to be evaluated against that variable, that is taking clock cycles to do so. So if you have that kind of level in production, it might be good to have a production version of the iRule and then a logging version of the iRule. But test and check your performance on that side. Couple of other things on the logging side is don't log to disk except in the lab, because that affects performance. All that possible IO blocking if it's if it's a lot of logging. Possibly don't log every request. Take a random sample of requests and log those. Don't let me see. I think two other things real quick, and then we'll move on to another one. Throwing a log statement in every event. So if you have an iRule that you set aside in your toolbox that has every single event, and it has just a log statement, this happened, or whatever, and you're not using that to troubleshoot necessarily, other than these are the events that fire on my particular application, because then you can start from there. If you know that X number of events fire, then you can start to narrow down where you put your logic in. And so that was a handy tip of just have one of those iRules to sit off and track what events trigger on your particular application. And then the other one was make sure you utilize the LB commands to track flows. So within your iRules, if you don't know exactly what's being sent where, you can use your LB pool and LB server and LB attach and all those different commands. LB use all of those iRules or all those commands when you're initially troubleshooting things to be able to understand where your flow is. All right, I think that's enough on logging. Nope, I have one more. The other one, this was from Nat Thracicorn. His was if you put stuff in the request and then the request send events, or the response and the response send, you'll see what happens within TMM or within the plugins, whether it's ASM or APM or whatever, because if you get the request and then that happens on the client side of the proxy, and then the request send happens on the server side after being manipulated on the server side of the proxy. Of course, that's with request response. It's the opposite. Then you can see what Big IP actually did to the request or the response. on both sides. And so that's a helpful workflow to be able to log at both sides of those. And then, yeah. So, okay, let's move on from logging everything. And then the other thing that that Pat Chang was talking about there was the error catching with the catch command or info exists. I've really started to use less as little variables as possible. So using the info exists is really helpful because you don't have to do the set variable 0 and then, if variable is a value, you can just check to see if it exists, and if it exists, then act on it. And so that's helpful for reducing the amount of stuff that you have in your commands. I did have another thing with with catching things and thinking about errors that you're trying to catch. And I had another video contribution from John Allen on that with the tickle resets that you see in your iRules.
Hi, this is John Allen. Anytime you're writing an iRule and you are testing it, like I'm doing here using curl, or maybe you're browsing to it using your favorite browser, what happens is you get a reset by peer. This is not a connection refused and not a connection timeout. This is a TCP reset. What you do is you look in the LTM log file and you'll see a tickle error. As you see here, it says no such variable, and it tells you it shows you which line that caused this error. This type of error is only caught during the execution of the iRule. The system could not have caught it while you're editing and saving the iRule. So hopefully this is helpful, and happy iRolling.
Okay, thank you, John. And that moves us on from error catching to number 4, and that's using curl, openssl, HTTP IE for testing instead of using the browser. The browser's fine and it's useful, but sometimes you deal with connection longevity. So you'll test an iRule, you'll make a change, you test it again, and you get the same result. And oftentimes it's because that connection hasn't timed out from the request. And so using command line tools often avoids that kind of stuff. And so if I just real quick, you see curl, you can see, let me, so curl is you can put all kinds of commands options on curl. You can send custom headers, you can send data payloads, and pretty much anything you can do with the browser you can do with curl. Just you have to know all the switches, and curl is one of those tools where if you take a look at the help, obviously there's a lot going on there with curl. So that's a very, very mature, robust tool, and so there's not a whole lot you can't do with it, and it's pretty nice. There's another one that I've been using on the command line called HTTPI, and it's pretty simple, where you can just do HTTP. You put the destination. You can do a lot of the same things with headers and all that, and the command syntax is just a little bit more friendly. And so I use HTTP IE, although the command line option for that is HTTP. And I looked today, they actually have a downloadable Mac, Windows, and Linux client, but it's early beta, so you have to sign up or get on the wait list for that. But the color stuff in the outputs kind of nice, and so I like HTTP IE. All right, question, comment. Okay, yeah, John Allen is very, very very prevalent in the community. He's got a lot of tools out there in the code share, and so he's definitely a good follow. And so yeah, using command line openssl stuff if you want to test your certs, test your crypto ciphers and all that. So highly recommend that. Another one is to use the Tickle shell on Big IP or Linux Mac to test your native Tickle command syntax and operation. I use this one a ton because it's one thing to have to send requests to the Big IP. One, you have to have the Big IP running. You have to, set up iRules to be able to receive that. You have to, if you're not just returning that in like an HTTP response, and not everything I test is HTTP, then I also have to have a backend server or build additional iRules to be a response agent and all that kind of stuff. So using the Tickle shell for most of the stuff that is native Tickle is really helpful. And so I have a quick video I filmed actually years ago, but it's helpful just to kind of see what you can do with the Tickle shell, and I'll play that now.
In today's 2-minute tech tip, I'm covering a couple use cases for the Tickle shell that is included with the Big IP. iRules, TMSH, and iCall scripts, the implementation section of iApps, they all use Tickle, so getting comfortable with the Tickle shell will be quite beneficial. A very common task in iRules development is handling the URI. Now, you can't use custom iRules commands like HTTP URI in the Tickle shell, but you can set the URI in a variable and work with that. So let's get logged into the Big IP and launch the Tickle shell. And let's set the URI to path to files.ext with a parameter and a value. Then we'll use string range against it to pull out everything after the path. All right, there's the URI. So we can use a string range command against that. All right, we got almost everything, but we're missing the slash. Okay, so there's one example. Another example is code efficiency. You can use the time command to compare one way of doing things versus another and see the results instantly. So we can check the time on a simple math problem by iterating it a couple 100,000 times. So let's time the expression of 3 times 4 and do that 100,000 times. So that's about 1.59 microseconds per iteration. Now, if we wrap that in curly braces and run that again, you can see that that's quite a bit, orders of magnitude actually, more efficient wrapping it in curly braces than not doing that. All right, so one more example, and then we'll get out of here. If you are fans of The Office, like I am, and I'm just going to copy this, you will recall when Jim set a macro for every time Dwight typed his name, it ended up diapers. So we can do a string map on that of every time we see Dwight. Let's replace that with diapers. And X. Boom, there we go. All right, I'm out of time, but I highly recommend using the Tickle shell as a tool to use in your Tickle environment. This has been your 2-minute tech tip on the Tickle shell.
That Dwight diapers one is my favorite. That's a lot of fun. But the Tickle shell is fantastic for being able to work out your syntax issues with commands. Anytime you're doing an advanced scan or doing some regex, highly recommend just work in Tickle shell. HTTP URI, HTTP or HTTP host, all those are cached anyway. Those don't change in the system, so you can just set variables in Tickle shell, work with the data that you know you're receiving, even if it's multiple versions of that data. You can do an X1, X2, X3, X4, whatever, and then test all of those with your syntax. Then when you have that good, then roll that into your iRules, and that way you can work on that whether you have access to a big IP or not. Next tip, which this is a fantastic one because I don't know how many of you have over the years commented lines in and out, and then wrote something, thought it was good, tried to optimize it, and then you're trying to back that out, and you're like, oh man, what was it that I wrote? That is not a great way to not break things. And so using source control is fantastic. And I don't have source control into VS Code yet. There's some differences in the way that works that I haven't figured out yet. So my source control is in my PyCharm edit. My PyCharm editor for Python, even though it's all typical iRules. That's where I keep my iRules toolbox. And so because I know how to use my Git source control there, but definitely whatever your Git source or whatever your source control is, whether it's Git or is SVN still a thing? Tortoise SVN, whatever your SVN of choice is, I recommend that, because you can save whatever your versions are, and then you just create a branch, make whatever changes you want. If they're terrible, just blow that branch away, start over, check out another branch. But if it's good, it's a new version, merge that into your file, then you have both versions in your history, and you can pull either. And so that's a highly recommend that over bringing lines in and out of configuration. And the next one, and this was a fantastic one I just learned last week. Remember a few minutes ago when I was talking about the long-lived connections in browsers and why it's probably better to use command line tools because your iRule changes don't seem to work. This was a recommendation to create a pair of UDP and TCP profiles with crazy low idle timeouts for like 10 seconds or whatever. His recommendation was 10. And in that way, by the time you save and go over to your tools, any connections there were going to be long gone. He had a comment there that you could do a TMSH, delete all connections. I would not recommend being in the habit of doing that because you build muscle memory doing that. And even in the lab, by building the muscle memory there, you might do that in production, and then you've impacted real traffic, and that's not good. So just avoiding the muscle memory of that, I avoid that. And then for performance, I've had one example in that Tickle shell of using the time command. Excuse me. Not fully over what I had last week. I had a couple days where it's like, oh, I feel great, and then I had kind of like a rebound stuff. So my apologies. But using the time command allows you to see if an if statement is more performant than a switch command on that particular traffic that you're evaluating. Is scan better than setting variables a different way? Is using regex in a small pattern matching better than string commands if you have to use a lot of string commands to get to what you want to do? Using the time command is highly recommended on the Tickle shell side. In iRules, you can use timing, and what timing does is it will allow you to time per event what's going on in that event. So you can't necessarily get directly to a single command, but what you can do is if you have many moving pieces between your event and then the command under test in that event, try to isolate the changes to only that command. So you can have 5, 6, 7 things going on in your HTTP request, change one thing, and then test the difference between that one thing. You just want to try and make it as apples as you can, so you can see the impact to your change in that event. However, that's not 100% rock, 100% accurate. And so timing is a, kind of a best case. You'll definitely find the things that are orders of magnitude different, but the things that might shave off a few cycles here or there, the better option there is to use the rule profiler that is available on Big IP. And I don't know how many people have used that. If you've used that, let me know. But let me add something in here so you guys can just see. Let me bring this back in. And let me go down here. Okay. So the rule profiler allows you to set a number of different events, what it's tracking. You can do the timestamp and what's going on with process. And it'll actually pull the bytecode out if you set that as one of your masks. And what all of these log statements, and these will be log statements that go to your disk, or I think disk. Maybe you can send them to an HSL log provider as well. But you can gather all of those logs together and then put it into a tool called Campfire, and that is available out on GitHub. And so it's a Flask, like a Python Flask app, and it uses a Perl module to actually do the graph generation of looking at how impactful all the different bytecode statements are in your environment. And so that will give you a clear stack trace at the bytecode level of what's going on with your iRules. So I've got that queued up to write about that a little bit in the new year. And I've got on my development box, including these articles. I was going to do a little bit updates on these articles. And in part 1 of this article, there's a drawing that I want to update because it's, for me anyway, that isn't super clear on what's going on between TMM and the Tickle virtual machine. And so I've got some redraws that make a little bit more sense to me. Your mileage may vary, but I'll be having that, or I'll have that coming out in the new year. And have some comments. Let me look at that. Oh, that's from Boo. Thanks, Boo. He's my production assistant today. I appreciate all the help out there. And yeah, the article's out there. Campfire. It's a 3-part article there on the execution tracing and performance profiling. But those are options on Big IP that you can run through, and I highly recommend that you do if you're trying to shave off every last cycle from what you're doing. Because as an F5er, if you guys want to have very unperformant, is that the right word? Not well performing iRules, and that requires you guys to buy more boxes. That doesn't necessarily hurt my feelings, but we want you guys to have the best possible performance and experience with our products as well, as you can. And so I would definitely do that. There's another one that's out here. I'll show it momentarily, but I'm not a huge fan of the naming of this tool, but it's test-driven development, and it's Tickle, so it's called Testicle is the name of the test library. And not a fan of the references, but it's super helpful if you want to do test-driven development, and so you want to look at your rules and you want them to do a certain thing. Then you can build out test suites to say, hey, here's what it should do. This is what it does do. I'm going to give you a copy of the rule, and then it will run your tests, and then it should come out with test okay, or and then verifications of the things that you're doing in those tests. So if test-driven development is something that you're into, and you want to give that a shout, or give that a run, that's testcl.com, and you can go out there and download that and play with that. And that's it. That's the run of the there's all kinds of little things here and there that you pick up over the years. Would love to hear in the comments on Google, in the post of this YouTube video, or out there on LinkedIn, what troubleshooting tips that you guys have and you'd like to share with the community. I'd like to give a shout out to contributors to this show, from people who have sent in advice and things that they do in their environments. And so thank you all for that. And we have upcoming, before we get out of here, we're not here on Thursday because we're still on holiday break. But next Tuesday, Boo will be back for another episode of At the Edge. And I believe he's going to be talking about some bulletin board stuff with the Lori McVitie. So I got a promo for that that will play now. And thank you all for joining me today. And you guys have a nice and safe New Year's, and we'll catch you in 2022.
What's up, community? Lately, I've been playing this game called Lord, which is an old text-based BBS game from back in the 80s, early 90s or so. Back then, I was playing on a 1200 baud modem. Took forever to play all my turns. Nowadays, I can play in like 5 minutes or so really quickly. We'll be talking about that technology with Lori McVitie on the kickoff to the DevCentral lineup, January 4th, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. So we'll talk about how BBSs relate to modern edge technology today. Should be super fun. Again, that's 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, January 4th at the Edge.